So I'll focus on the macro aspect, not on everything. There are problems with everything. As has already been spelled out, official data does not account for the unorganized sector. That's something very important to take into account, because when we look at GDP we are looking at from the point of view of the organized sector and the unorganized sector. And in my when I looked at the paper which gave the new methodology for the 2011-12 new GDP series, I found that 29 of the 38 subsectors of the unorganized sector, the data is from the organized sector, is not from the unorganized sector. That means you're not including the unorganized sector in the calculation of the GDP numbers. And I think we need to focus on the GDP numbers, because that is one number which tells us the state of the economy, the prosperity of the individuals. So we need to be very clear about that. And what, as Mr. Yashwant Sinha has already spelled out, I'll not go into details. We have the various indicators, annual survey of industries, index of industrial production, motor vehicle sales, sales tax, corporate sector growth, and service tax. All these are running down, and these are the factors that are used to measure the unorganized sector. And they all come from the organized sector. They don't come from the unorganized sector. So in other words, independent of the organized sector, we don't know what the contribution of the unorganized sector to GDP is. So to assume that the unorganized sector is contributing the same way as the organized sector is an incorrect thing. Similarly, when we get this data of 5%, 4.5%, 6%, 5.8%, these are quarterly estimates. And for quarterly data, the database is even smaller. Very few sectors, and especially in the industrial sector, we have only 300-400 companies whose current data has come in the stock market. So that's all that is there. So definitely the quarterly data does not include the unorganized sector data at all. So we are only using the organized sector to estimate the unorganized sector, which is a mistake. Next slide, please. So today my argument is that there's not only a decline in growth rate, but there's actually a recession in the economy. Because if we include the unorganized sector separately, and for that we need to look at the data. So IIP is down, core sector is down, freight traffic is down, retail trade is down, sectors like auto are down in negative growth rate, FMCG growth rate is down, tax collections are less than the budgeted estimates. In the budget we estimated that the tax collection would rise 12%, but if the economy is growing much less, naturally the tax collection would also grow less. Consumption in the rural areas is falling, credit offtake is very low. So all these are indications that actually something very dramatically is wrong. Investment rate is down because the capacity utilization data put out by RBI shows that capacity utilization is going down. And that's representing only the organized sector, not the unorganized sector. So when we think about the organized and the unorganized sector, what we find is that it got hit. The unorganized sector got hit first by demonetization, because the unorganized sector is the one which works with cash, and when there's cash shortage, then that sector gets hit. Similarly, the GST, even though it exempts the unorganized sector, hit the small scale and the unorganized sector, because the unorganized sector not being registered does not get input credit. It cannot give input credit. And then there's a reverse charge mechanism which it gets hit by. So three reasons why the unorganized sector demand shifted to the organized sector. And I'll only quote the pressure cooker industry chairman, Mr. Jagannathan. Last year he said in his annual report that we have 5 units in the organized sector and 25 units in the unorganized sector, and demand has shifted from the 25 units to us. So we are growing very well, but the unorganized sector is declining. And this kind of report has come from various sectors. So in other words, both GST and demonetizations hit the unorganized sector unambiguously. It started declining, but the organized sector was rising. So we cannot say because the organized sector is rising, therefore the unorganized sector is also rising. All the methods that have to be changed to be able to incorporate the unorganized sector. Now, what this has resulted in is that income and wealth distribution was getting skewed. If you look at the Oxfam data and the world inequality data, with the demonetization and GST, the unorganized sector getting hit, the income distribution has got further skewed. And therefore, the poor people have suffered even more. And this is something which is continuing. And the government thought that the black economy would be hit by demonetization. But the test for that would be the tax GDP ratio should have risen. The direct tax GDP ratio has not risen. The overall tax GDP ratio has not risen. So we cannot say that the black economy has been hit as a result of these steps that the government took. Next, please. So the question is, Our problems today are because of the policy shocks that have come in the economy in the last 3 years. These are not cyclical factors. These are structural factors because of the way the unorganized sectors got hit in the economy. It's also not a legacy issue. The government keeps saying it's a legacy issue. We inherited it because in the last 5-6 years, if you look at the official data, we have reached 8% rate of growth 3 times, including during the demonetization year, which actually was the reason people doubted the new data. But if we've been hitting 8% rate of growth repeatedly, then it's not a legacy issue. It's something that has been created post the 8% rate of growth that was there. And what is it? As Mr. Yashwant Sinha pointed out, it's a demand shortage that has created the problem, and that began from the unorganized sectors, and therefore what happened was that the unorganized sectors went down, and that then affected slowly the other thing, the organized sector. And what has also happened is that our attempt to digitize, they cannot deal with digitization, they cannot deal with formalization. So the continuing attack on the unorganized sector, and that is something we need to take into account. Next, please. So, problems, acute economy, growth rate, employment, budgetary calculations, Mudra government data which was not released, consumption data which is released, data which is not released. GDP, there have been several controversies. That has gaps. Companies don't. Within the should be. So, in other words, MCA database, looking up at the nature of companies, that is a problem. Second was no batch series was available because it was said that MCA 21 did not stabilize till 2011-12. But then post 11-12 we have shut down 3.7 lakh, 3.3 lakh companies which are supposed to be shell companies. So if shell companies are contributing to the GDP, then by shutting it down, what happens? So that destabilizes the series once again. Then the subcommittee of the Statistical Commission came out with a series showing that during the UPA 1 and 2, the rate of growth was higher than the NDA period, and that was rejected by the government. That created a huge controversy. Then the official series came, but the official series said that during demonetization, the rate of growth was the highest in the period. That again put to doubt what the validity of that was. Then Mr. Subramanian, the former chief economic advisor, came out saying using high frequency data, you can show that the rate of growth is less by 2.5%. That again created a controversy. And then finally, the NSO, they did a survey of the MCA 21 companies, a select set of companies, and they found 38.7% were out of survey. So either they were not at the address, either they were not producing what they said they were producing, or they'd been shut down. So that brings again to doubt the MCA 21 series, and if that doesn't stabilize, then there's a problem. So in other words, there are 7 different controversies on GDP, and now we're going into the next set of base change from 2021-22 without actually sorting these issues out. So these controversies will continue and so on. So what should policy focus on? I think rather than tax cuts, as has been said, and concessions to the organized sector, we need to increase investments in the economy. So expenditures would have been better. And we need to focus on the unorganized sectors and rural areas first. So farmers' incomes have to be given a boost. Higher allocations are needed for MGNREGS. And there's a need for a scheme like MGNREGS for the urban areas, which doesn't exist at the moment. And we need to increase access to credit to micro and small sectors. Further, we need to disaggregate the MSME sector because micro sector is 99% of the MSME sector. So when we say policies for MSME, it doesn't mean we have policies for micro sector, it's for small and medium sector. It doesn't benefit the micro sector. So we need to disaggregate the MSME sector into micro separate and small and medium separate. GST, I think, needs a major reform because it's structurally flawed. It's not simply implementation problem. By July 2019, in 2 years of operation, there were some like 1,400 changes that were brought about or judgments that came which brought about changes. So the massive confusion even for the organized sector, how to deal with GST. The problem is that the benefit of computerization is mixed up with the benefit of VAT when we are thinking of GST. And the two should not be mixed up. VAT is very difficult to implement for the small and the unorganized sector, but computerization can help. So I think what I have suggested, I've been suggesting is that we need to go for a GST, which is a last point tax like in America, so that we can collect from 5% of the units 95% of the tax. 95% can go out of the system, and that will simplify GST. There are huge income and wealth disparities, so we need to go for wealth tax, estate duty, and gift tax to raise additional resources. And even George Soros first said in 2012 that the rich in America need to pay more, and he was supported by the European rich from Italy, France, and Germany. He said otherwise capitalism would not survive. And he said that again some 7-8 months back. So we need to raise direct taxes and cut the indirect taxes on basic and essential goods and services. And these additional resources can then be spent further on the unorganized sector and the rural infrastructure like health, education, drinking water, communication, etc., etc. And we can discuss these further. Thank you very much for your patience.